This is gonna be a fun video. Dark Souls 3 is an inherently linear game compared to the other two in the Dark Souls trilogy, and I've always wondered how that linearity affects each area's overall difficulty. I asked my audience to score each Dark Souls 3 zone on a difficulty scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the easiest answer and 10 being the hardest answer. A couple mathematical equations on my phone calculator later, and we have the results. Results that are only possible thanks to you, my dear viewers. If you're a regular, consider leaving a like and especially a comment, just to let the YouTube algorithm know you enjoy the channel. It's the only way for us to keep growing on the way to 40,000 subscribers. Also, with 2026 around the corner, I really want to play more Souls-like games. I've created a poll with a host of various Souls-likes I've yet to play, and I want you, my audience, to vote for the ones you most want to see me cover. The top 12 picks will all be played, and videos will be made throughout the next year. So hop into the description or the pinned comment below and let your voice be heard. Also, apologies if my voice sounds awful today, I have a blocked nose, but we are fighting through it. With all that being said, I'm Billy S, and these are the Dark Souls 3 areas ranked by difficulty, according to my community. At number 23, we have Firelink Shrine, which scored a total difficulty average of 1.61 out of 10, with 170 votes for easiest area in the game. It's no surprise, the hub areas are often considered the safest locations in Soulsborne, almost always devoid of any dangers or enemies that plague them. I'd say Firelink in Dark Souls 3 is actually one of the more dangerous hubs myself though. You've got regular hollows that mill about on the hill leading up to the shrine, and if you work your way to the left side, you might run into the Uji Katana wielding hollow who is not to be trifled with. It's also very easy, while traversing the rafters following a successful tree skip, to accidentally fall from a high height and splat onto the ground below. Gravity is always one step away from terminal. During the Patches questline, you can get locked in the Firelink Shrine Tower, with the only options of escape being to plummet to your death and respawn, use a Homeward Bone to return to the shrine's main room, or a precarious set of coffin parkour that gets you the Estus Ring as a reward, which is an absolute game changer on higher New Game Plus cycles. I think I'd rank our next entry below Firelink myself, but they're extremely interchangeable and pretty much part of the same map. At number 22, we have the Cemetery of Ashe, which scored a total difficulty average of 1.79 out of 10, with 170 votes for easiest area. The starting zone of the game, you awaken from a coffin with naught to do but kill a few simple hollows and begin your journey into Lothric. Most of the enemies encountered here are woefully simple, just decrepit hollows who can be killed in a few hits of your blade, with the only dangers being when they decide to pull out a crossbow to hit you from afar. You're in no danger from gravity deaths until the second half, where you're on a cliffside overlooking the boss arena for Udek's Gundyr, and even then, the main danger here is just that the hollows can seemingly come out of nowhere to ambush you as a group if you're not careful. The boss himself is pretty tough for a tutorial fight if you're unfamiliar with the series, but my audience, you guys can handle him with ease. What likely puts this area above Firelink is the giant crystal lizard you can find on the optional side path. This creature acts as a fun test on any new game playthrough. It's big, has a few crystal AoEs, can roll around at the speed of sound, and its bites can rip through your health depending on your class. Every once in a while, this lizard will get a sneaky kill on me. But like my viewers, one tough yet optional enemy isn't enough to remotely raise the cemetery's difficulty ranking beyond the most basic of averages. At number 21, we have the High Wall of Lothric, which scored a total difficulty average of 4.04 out of 10, with 85 votes for easiest area and 2 votes for hardest area. The jump in difficulty averages from our previous entry to the High Wall is fairly indicative that the game takes off the training wheels here, and the High Wall of Lothric is not forgiving. From the moment you enter, you've got various paths that lead to enemy-filled battlements. On a nearby tower is the first of the Pus of Men encounters, where you can get some early upgrade materials, but only if you can learn how to deal with whatever the fuck this moveset is supposed to be. There's a dragon that will breathe fire on you if you're indecisive further along the wall, and quick players can make it to a door beneath the Drake to reach a hidden room containing a mimic with a fairly decent early game starting weapon. You're then introduced to Lothric Knights, Woedenaz, the main staple of the city of Lothric, whom I absolutely dread with every fibre of my being. Gone are the days of easily parrying the Silver Knights and Black Knights of Dark Souls. In are the parry timings of the much faster Lothric Knights who love to hand me my ass at every opportunity, whether up here or in the final courtyard before Vort and the Dancer. The optional path to receive an Estus Shard and the Grey Rat Cell Key has also been the death of me a couple times. Lots of enemies, starting with a spear-wielding Lothric Knight and ending in a room filled with hard-hitting hollows and a ton of dogs. By the time I reach the end of the high wall, I'm salivating at the chance to fight Vort and get out of there because as far as bosses go, he's hilariously easy in comparison to the level you fought to reach him. My viewers have even proved that myself, as he scored a 2.84 during my Dark Souls 3 boss difficulty ranking a year ago. But thanks to all the optional paths and some surprisingly tough enemies, the high wall still gets a solid average score and acts as a nice early game difficulty boost following the easy tutorial. At number 20, we have the Undead Settlement, which scored a total difficulty average of 4.19 out of 10, with 68 votes for easiest area and 3 votes for hardest area. I've always found the Undead Settlement a tough location to rank when it comes to these types of polls, because on the one hand, the area feels difficult on your first playthrough as you're trying to learn the different paths through the village. You have no idea what's awaiting you around every corner. You're gonna make so many new friends here, like evangelists that try to immolate you with fiery hugs, wretches who are a pain in the ass to fight as they sneak up on you, giant arrows that pierce a graveyard you have to run through, and God forbid the red-cloaked muscle men throw giant pots. But once you've played Dark Souls 3 enough times, you realise that most of the Undead Settlement is just optional noise. The optimal routes through the area are fairly easy to access, and most of the enemies are entirely optional. Hell, the boss of this area is completely optional if you're uninterested in boss weapons and equipment. A large part of the difficulty of the Undead Settlement is just in how big the area is. The enemies themselves aren't any more challenging than what you faced on the High Wall. In fact, none of the enemies here come close to the difficulty of the Lothric Knights, but because the bonfires are spaced out across the whole settlement, you have to face a lot of enemies between each run. It gives the illusion of being more difficult than it actually is. But if you take the time to explore every nook and cranny, every optional path, you'll find some tough setups. The optional fire demon you can fight with Siegward, and the following path leading to some caged limbs, dogs, and evangelists all to get the Chloranthy ring is tough. Or going down into the lower chasms to find Arena of Karim and having to deal with skeletons and rats in danger, oh my! Even the last room of the settlement where an Outrider Knight stands between you and the Crucifixion Woods ready to cut you down, oh my god. With so much to see and do here, it's like a mini Elden Ring. You can just take a different path through the settlement, try an easier route, and ultimately, you'll be mastering this zone with ease. At number 19, we have the Crucifixion Woods, which scored a total difficulty average of 4.54 out of 10, with 53 votes for easiest area and 1 vote for hardest area. This entry encompasses the Flooded Woods themselves, as well as the Road of Sacrifices that leads to the woods. It's all the same area, title cards be damned. The first third sees you running past Corvians and navigating an unused highway that leads deeper into the forest. You can encounter a butcher NPC down one of the side paths, and there are a couple of little drops you can take to reach inaccessible ledges for extra items. The enemies here can overwhelm you if you're not aggressive, but they're nothing too out of this world. The Flooded Woods below, though, are a different beast. You've got crucified ogres that can destroy you in a couple of hits, hollows that wield large tree trunk spears that clip you more often than you'd like, the optional Black Knight guarding an Ember who is significantly tougher than the Black Knights of Dark Souls, and who can forget the treacherous giant enemy crabs that lurk in the swamp, waiting to swipe at you with their claws. I've seen them enough now in Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, and Night Rain to no longer feel threatened by them like I was on a first playthrough, but that's what they want you to think. Right before they get you in a grab, you couldn't have stopped, and suddenly you're at your last bonfire. We've got 2 NPCs guarding Farron Keep, which, yes, you can cause them to fall down the ladder to the swamp if you know how to manipulate their AI, but if not, they can be a tough early game fight. Dark Souls 3 really likes its regular NPC enemy types, and I appreciate how they're done here. On the other side of the area, you have the magical ruins that lead to the Crystal Sage, which, while simple enough to explore, can catch players off guard if they're not used to dodging magic spells, or they're just trying to rush through. Personally, I think the Crucifixion Woods are hard carried in difficulty by the crabs, and without them the area would be below the high wall. But those crabs just know how to control their environment and leave you thinking, how about we just don't come here, ever? At number 18, we have the Profaned Capital, which scored a total difficulty average of 4.67 out of 10, with 49 votes for easiest area and 2 votes for hardest area. With our first 5 entries, they were the first 5 areas you visit in-game, so having them at the bottom of the difficulty ranking makes sense. Profaned Capital is near the end of the second third of the game, and is home to one of the Lords of Cinder, so being this low on the list is not the best look, is it? There are 2 parts of the Profaned Capital, the main path, which takes you down either a large ramp or a series of rubble leading to the main temple that houses the Profaned Flame. This is a giant fire that, with the power of the priestesses around it, can be used to attack you from afar. You also have to deal with stone gargoyles that try to stop your approach, and once inside you have a host of enemies in various groups that you can choose to face, or just run past because the boss is literally 2 seconds away and easy to reach. On the other hand, you have the Poison Swamp sub-area that loops back to Irithyll Dungeon. Most players have no reason to even visit this portion of the map, you get to deal with more poison, and the award for most fucked up enemy design in FromSoft history with the Monstrosities of Sin. But this is also a path that leads to Siegward of Katarina, allowing you to rescue him so you can bring him in the boss battle against Yorm. I imagine the Profaned Capital lands above the other areas on this list purely because the enemies here can hit hard, and due to it being later in the game, you can convince yourself it's more difficult. But IMO, and this is my hot takes coming in again, I would put this area below the high wall. It's semantics at this point, they're all in the 4.0 range, and it's capped off with one of the easiest bosses in the game anyway. Thank you, gimmicks. At number 17, we have the Kiln of the First Flame, which scored a total difficulty average of 4.71 out of 10, with 83 votes for easiest area, which makes sense. It's a glorified boss arena with a small hilltop run-up and a slightly darkened version of Firelink Shrine for good measure, but it technically is an area, so I had to count it. It lands this high on the list purely because the difficulty comes from the Soul of Cinder boss fight, and that naturally split a lot of the audience. Some people find the Soul of Cinder to be an easy fight, others find it to be extremely difficult, some may not have even taken the bosses into account, just focusing on the areas themselves on the poll, which would make this one technically the easiest in the game, hence the 83 votes for easiest area. The joys of needing to rank every zone. We get confusing ones like the Kiln that just break the audience in two. Not much else to say. Soul of Cinder harder than the previous 6 entries? Crazy. At number 16, we have the Untended Graves, which scored a total difficulty average of 4.87 out of 10, with 46 votes for easiest area and 6 votes for hardest area. One of the smaller zones in the game, the Untended Graves is a revisit to the Cemetery of Ashe and Firelink Shrine maps, only this time the lights have been turned off. And this lets all the tough enemies come out to play. We've got scary dogs, Corvians who want to impale you, the terrifying Grave Wardens who will absolutely fuck you up with their dual-wielding twin blades, and their ability to destroy the stamina of all who attempt to block, while on the optional path we have 2 giant crystal lizards instead of 1, making the battle a lot more intense as you have to juggle multiple large enemies at once. Champion Gundyr is certainly a big threat for casual players. He's a souped-up version of Udex, and he's just as tough to parry and defeat. Unless you're me, in which case you became a god gamer at rolling out of his attacks and taking him on parryless, #humblebrag, before reaching the Dark Firelink Shrine and finding yourself accosted by a host of Black Knights hanging around outside. While you can obviously run past them to explore the shrine at your leisure, taking the time to fight the Black Knights can prove dangerous due to their hard-hitting attacks and faster movesets. They remind the player that they were the toughest enemies in Dark Souls for a reason, and I've only got respect for my legacy enemies. But ultimately, with most of these guys being skippable with the right routing, and the boss here being tough yet fair, a 4.87 honestly feels pretty accurate for the Untended Graves. It gets a late game difficulty boost to keep it out of the bottom 5, but that's all it gets. At number 15, we have Anor Londo, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.05 out of 10, with 40 votes for easiest area and 3 votes for hardest area. Now, to clarify, Anor Londo to me is everything past the spiral stairway elevator, aka when the Anor Londo area name appears on screen. Everything prior to that is a part of Irithyll. As such, there's not much to discuss here. It's a similar situation to the Profaned Capital in that we're exploring a very scaled down area to reach the Lord of Cinder. But unlike that area, Anor Londo benefits from being so neatly tied to Irithyll. You've got multiple Silver Knights awaiting your ascent, who have received a heck of a buff from Dark Souls. I had to farm these guys for Covenant items a few years ago, and while I can't remember any of the parry timings, I know it was hard regardless of how many times I fought them. You enter the cathedral via the giant's blacksmith, having to accept his death, before taking on a ton of Aldrich's goons in the main hall. You've got to open the main door to unlock a shortcut back to the bonfire, as well as a straight shot to the boss, but you have to face the Deep Accursed, who is stationed above the main gate. I hate those guys. They're creepy, way too hairy, remind me of giant spiders, and can absolutely fuck you up if you're not prepared. And then there's Aldrich, who almost certainly buffed this area's difficulty due to his bullshit arrow rain and magic spam. I also wouldn't be surprised if a few of the voters thought that I was including the area post-Pontiff as part of Anor Londo's entry, just because otherwise I don't really see how this area lands this highly on the list. It's a fairly quick zone with only a handful of tough enemy encounters, but that's a mystery for the YouTube comments. I know some of you voters are watching this video, let me know. At number 14, we have the Cathedral of the Deep, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.21 out of 10, with 15 votes for easiest area and 10 votes for hardest area. For me, the Cathedral is the first real step up in difficulty for the early game, as we're faced with an area that contains one central bonfire, and your goal is to find all the different shortcuts that wrap around to it. You have the outside graveyard and the chasm below, filled with leech monsters, respawning zombies, grave wardens, and more. It's a real in-depth entry point, but does come with a shortcut you can take with this ladder. Then you've got the rooftop rafters, which is this massive stretch where you have to make it all the way to the end of the roofing to a large cathedral door that lets you inside. There are wretches constantly ambushing you, projectiles being fired your way, some grave wardens near the end looking to surprise you, and with how few Estus you'll have at this point in the game, this path can prove brutal and fatal, especially as once you're inside, you still need to progress through a few more rooms to actually reach the shortcut elevator. Once indoors, you get to dodge some giant slams, take on some cathedral knights, there's a Deep Accursed in this large square room, and on the lowest floor you'll be travelling through gunk and avoiding the feet of giants on the way to the deacons. And that's not taking into account the optional rooftop rafters that lead to the Rosaria's Fingers Covenant, or the Patches encounter that can be had if you're lucky. I cannot stress enough just how tightly interconnected the cathedral is, while still forcing you down long stretches of gameplay where failure means starting from square one. It's fascinating level design, very reminiscent of the original Demon's Souls, and I love it. Unforgiving, yet fair, not so difficult that it feels out of place in the early game, deserving of its final ranking. At number 13, we have the Catacombs of Karthus, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.28 out of 10, with 14 votes for easiest area and 8 votes for hardest area. The Catacombs are the first area of the mid-game, featuring a bit of a difficulty spike from what came before. To start with, skeletons are a more annoying enemy type than many of the ones faced in the early game. Some of them have the ability to come back to life, while others bounce around the arena with their agility and pierce weapons that go straight through your block. Midway through the level, they start to introduce trapped pots that release homing spirits if you break them, which have killed me more times than I care to admit. The larger Karthus skeletons are the real challenge here though, some of which I farm for Covenant items, and let me just say, never a fucking again. The paths here are tight, the progression isn't obvious, which leads you to dead ends where you might face bone wheels or slimes or giant rats, and if you muck up the end of the area, you might just find yourself falling from a rope bridge, or watching as the skeletons cross the rope bridge before it can fall. Heading down towards Smouldering Lake, you can face a fire demon and a mimic, which are just barely in the catacombs part of the area, as opposed to the lake, which is its own zone. And High Lord Wolnir, while not the most difficult boss, certainly has his moments, and while many of us find him easy, I know there are some of you out there who have been fucked over by this big spooky scary skeleton enough times to find him tough. The catacombs are an enclosed space more than anything else, which is completely different to everything else faced up to this point in the game, and that challenge is well worthy of a middle-of-the-pack finish. At number 12, we have the Smouldering Lake, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.45 out of 10, with 17 votes for easiest area and 10 votes for hardest area. Now this is interesting to rank in terms of difficulty, because if you're ranking the Smouldering Lake based purely on how easy it is to get to the boss, it's a 2. You have a ballista and a giant sandworm standing between you and the old Demon King, and that is it. It's incredibly simple to get to the fog gate, grab the nearby Demon Ruins bonfire, kill the boss, and then leave. However, if you're taking the entire area into account, including all of the optional exploration, which you should be for polls like this, Smouldering Lake, I'd argue, is a couple entries lower than it should be, because everything inside those demon ruins has the potential to kill you over and over again. The amount of times I've been sniped by those danged ranged fireballs while trying to run for the path that leads to the ballista is quite embarrassing. The ruins are also filled with the Gru enemies from Farron Keep, whom the fanbase have a particular hatred for due to their high aggression attacks, and their grabs that can come out of nowhere and leave you decimated. Then combine all this with basilisks in the lower levels, a Black Knight, and a bunch of Carthus skeletons up near the ballista, and you have a menagerie of enemies that can royally ruin your day with nary a bonfire to refuel at. Oh, and there's a fuck ton of crabs on the lake itself, plus the aforementioned Carthus sandworm that, while not tough, can be a little annoying to fight. There's a lot to see and do in the Smouldering Lake, more optional paths than I know what to do with, and the potential for death around every corner, so the fact it's only at the halfway point of the video shows to me that this level of difficulty is the game's turning point. At number 11, we have the Consumed King's Garden, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.76 out of 10, with 17 votes for easiest area and 15 votes for hardest area. Okay, my voters, you know I adore you. I'm so grateful for your participation, but in every community ranking we've done, there is always one entry where I'm just like, really? The Consumed King's Garden is a rather small side area just after the Dancer boss fight, which is filled with a toxic poison on the lowest level, as well as a ton of Pus of Man enemies that drove me up the wall in the High Wall of Lothric, and a handful of Cathedral Knights placed throughout the garden, mostly in the courtyard leading down to the boss. You do have a brief shortcut you can open with some wretches guarding it, which makes traversing the area so much easier, and it's a location you can easily rush through to make progress. I think the difficulty here comes from the toxic goop on the lowest floor, which effectively forces you to think fast and keep moving so you don't proc the toxic status. Meanwhile, you're having to stealth your way past the various Pus of Man enemies who are harder than the ones in the early game due to a higher damage output. And then you have Osiros as the area boss, who, while not the toughest fight in the game, has a couple of hard-hitting attacks including his instant charge, which I still have a grim hatred for. But then, you're at the end game. You should have the fire bombs to handle the Pus of Men, or fire paper if you want to go off with your weapon. What about moss clumps that heal toxic? If you get the excrement-covered ashes in the Irithyll sewers, you can literally buy these toxic heals from the Shrine Handmaid, and black fire bombs can be purchased from patches after the Firelink Tower event. I'm not trying to be that guy, but this is the one area in this game that has contingencies upon contingencies if you've been keeping your vendors up to date, and that's why I feel that maybe this area ranks a little higher than I would put it. At number 10, we have Farron Keep, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.81 out of 10, with 8 votes for easiest area and 24 votes for hardest area. Now this is a surprise, but a welcome one. I guarantee if I do this poll 5 years ago, Farron Keep lands way higher on the list, but I've been championing for years that while this early game Poison Swamp is tough, it's not as brutal as it was originally made out to be. You have to travel through the level, putting out 3 torches that can be found at 3 different stations. Initially, you might think, I'm supposed to just randomly find them while trudging through the muck? And my response is no, obviously not. The trick to Farron Keep is actually quite simple. The progression path is marked by fire. Torches, bonfires. If you follow the flames in a clockwise pattern around the keep, you will find all 3 fire stations without needing to deviate or get lost in the swamp. Stick to solid ground, maybe go out of your way to find an Estus shard or a Sublime Bone Dust every once in a while, but all the important landmarks can be hit by just following the fire. Naturally, if you want to explore the rest of the swamp, that's when things get a bit tougher. There are a lot of outer parts with extra goodies, enemies, and Easter eggs to find, as well as moments where the swamp goes up to your torso and your movement speed is fucked. On top of that, you're dealing with enemies like the Gru, who are brutal for this early in the game, especially in groups, and their elders, which wield shaman-like powers and giant tree trunks. They are especially terrifying. That one group of 3 on the leftmost wall comes to mind immediately. And after progressing down the main path, you then run into a war between the Gru and newly powered up Dark Wraiths from Dark Souls. Again, also tougher than their old school counterparts. It all ends with a fairly fair yet tough fight against the Abyss Watchers, the first Lord of Cinder, and the first boss in the game to truly test the player difficulty-wise, at least in my opinion. Have a map of the keep with you, and maybe you'll end up enjoying the swampy exploration. That being said, fuck Yellowfinger Hazel. She knows what she did. At number 9, we have the Ariandel Snowfield, which scored a total difficulty average of 6.42 out of 10, with 8 votes for easiest area and 36 votes for hardest area. If you're new to my channel and you've never seen a Dark Souls 3 area ranking of mine, let me explain. I like to split the painted world of Ariandel into 2 halves, the initial snowfield that ends when you reach the bridge to the chapel, and the Ariandel township, which encompasses everything else, the Corvian settlement, the mountain pass, the Gravetender chasm, etc. The Snowfield is a brutally fun opener for the DLC, featuring the Farron followers and their exceptional javelin skills, as well as the collapsing snowdrifts that leave you as a plaything for the various wolves that call Ariandel home. I love that ambush near the start where the wolves are coming at you from all sides and you have to figure out how to handle them, before accidentally drifting too close to the spawn of the champion's Great Wolf and having to deal with his bullshit. People who have played before can skip all this by climbing a very early hill, past some fiery dryads, to reach the bonfire in the chapel bridge with ease. I can only assume the 8 voters who ranked this in their 5 easiest areas of the game did this method. Or you can be a Chad and face the Millwood Knights and their tower on the far side of the area, complete with really cool Viking enemies to fight, and a series of ranged projectiles being shot at you that you need to avoid lest you fall flat on your face. And the Great Wolf can appear as you escape this area via the big hill, just to add insult to injury. It's funny, while I do think the township is the harder portion of Ariandel, I feel like I die more in the snowfield on any given playthrough. More ambushes and a greater concentration of enemies certainly make that more of a possibility. At number 8, we have the Grand Archives, which scored a total difficulty average of 6.91 out of 10, with 4 votes for easiest area and 64 votes for hardest area. We're in the end game now, Tinky Winky. The Grand Archives can be split into 2 halves, the first half, which sees you chasing down a crystal sage across the lower floors of the institution. You've got wretches looking to ambush you at every opportunity, and wax scholars who will flock to you with sorcery attacks galore. You gotta dunk your head in that candle wax to avoid the curse hands, and the way these floors twist and turn will ensure you're always going down the wrong path long before you find the right path. The second half of this sees you on the rooftops of the archives, trying to make your way to the uppermost floors while avoiding some stone gargoyles and discovering hidden paths, before then getting blocked by a trio of NPC-style enemies who really don't want you to reach the next shortcut. Further still, you can climb to the uppermost rooftop spires to face off against some ascended winged knights for extra goodies, but they're extremely tough to fight one-on-one, let alone in a group, very difficult. And this is finished off with a brutal sprint towards the boss arena and the final elevator shortcut as you rush across the giant upper bridge of Lothric that you saw all the way back when you arrived at the High Wall. The enemies here are the toughest that Lothric Castle has to offer, hitting you with brutal, damaging attacks and more, and the Twin Princes are an iconic fight that can be difficult to learn and definitely should be an Elden Ring Night Rain, I'm just saying. What I suspect keeps the Grand Archives in 8th place though, and not higher, is that the overall enemy variety of the Grand Archives is quite squishy. The Wretches and Scholars aren't very tanky, and once you kill the Crystal Sage roaming about, the first half becomes rather easy to venture through. It's mainly the second portion that really cements the difficulty of this endgame area, landing it this highly on the list. At number 7, we have Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.08 out of 10, with 2 votes for easiest area and 57 votes for hardest area. Irithyll is a real difficulty spike when it comes to Dark Souls 3, as it not only introduces a host of brand new, fairly difficult enemies to the mix, but it's also a massive sprawling city where the level doesn't actually end after beating the boss, having an entire explorable portion post-Pontiff that is just as tough to navigate as pre-Pontiff, and even introducing some classic foes such as the Anor Londo archers into the mix, as well as a really annoying covenant to access that requires you to kill 2 of Pontiff's dogs. But it's the first half of Irithyll that lands this highly. From the very start of your journey, as you get assaulted by a giant hound on the bridge leading to the city, to the Boreal Knights, whose dance-like sword swings and combos will leave you breathless, to the Fire Witches and their consorts, whose fire trails will catch you the moment you look away from their gaze, all the way to the Shadow People who hide in the darkness and appear when they get close to you. All the enemies in Irithyll are designed to be challenging and to work in tandem to catch the player off guard. The maze-like navigation as you go through darkened buildings, the city moat, the sewers, and this damn street with dogs, magicians, and a potential invader, it's downright evil. I do like the brief respite you get with Siegfried after the sewer, and finding the Hall of Guinevere's painting gives you a hint as to the true nature of the Boreal Valley. Then cap this part of Irithyll off with one of the toughest fights in the base game, Pontiff Sullivan, and you have a recipe for an area that remains infamous no matter the playthrough, no matter the player. At number 6, we have Lothric Castle, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.23 out of 10, with 65 votes for hardest area. If there's ever a location that ups the ante from moment zero, Lothric Castle fits that bill, introducing tough Lothric Knights and their commanders as regular enemies for the entire zone. You have to navigate your way through some opening halls until you reach the outer barracks, avoiding enemies trying to firebomb you, or even worse, hit you with those projectiles that removes your healing. Then you have to deal with multiple revived dragons, courtesy of the pus infecting all of Lothric, and the pus of men in the moat below this bridge that you need to hop into to collect all the extra goodies around the castle. All the enemies here do a surprising amount of damage, and the amount of regular soldiers who know how to cut off your healing supply is higher than any other Souls game. Lothric Knights are tough, but when they've got buddies who can heal them up, you realise that Lothric Castle is no joke. You can kill the 2 dragons by finding their weak spots within the castle itself, destroying the pus controlling them to cancel their attacks, but even then the challenge is tough. You have enemies upon enemies coming down upon you in this room, for example, and if you want to access the Sunlight Covenant, you have to climb a rooftop, beat up some tough enemies, drop down into this room, and face a Lothric Knight for the right to use the Statue of Sunlight. The boss here is the Dragon Slayer armor, who hits hard, and is the perfect enemy type to end a military-style area where knights reign supreme and everything hits like a truck. It's such a difficult zone that they give you the Dragon Slayer armor bonfire right before the Grand Archives bonfire, as you never know what could happen in those 3 paces between the 2 checkpoints. Lothric Castle always gets me killed regardless of playthrough, because the enemies hit hard, it's a tough zone to rush through, and the toughest opponents can even fuck up endgame builds with their various buffs and heals. They earn this spot on the docket with aplomb. At number 5, we have Irithyll Dungeon, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.26 out of 10, with 2 votes for easiest area and 82 votes for hardest area. There is a special place in hell for the minds who designed the Irithyll Dungeon. They took what could have been a slam dunk of an area, as it actually has an interesting level layout, and absolutely botched the execution with some of the worst enemies the series has ever seen. The Irithyll jailers and I have a very public feud on this channel that I will bring up every chance I get. They suck. Their gimmick of reducing your maximum HP sucks. Their ability to slow your character down so they can catch you in their grab, killing you due to your reduced HP, sucks. The fact they appear in droves, especially in the final room of the dungeon, sucks. They have such a cool looking design too, and it was wasted on an enemy type that takes the skill out of the game and says fuck your build and fuck you. It sucks. Beyond the jailers, we've got horrifying abominations that sneak attack you at various intervals. I like these guys, but they definitely pack a punch. The regular enemies here are also surprisingly tanky, able to overwhelm in groups, but that at least feels fair to what Dark Souls 3 is. I even like the EP Giant who you can try to kill or run past for the next part of the area. I think the rough part of Irithyll Dungeon though is that the shortcuts aren't very user-friendly, with some of them, like the one in the Giant Pit, being very obtuse. Meanwhile, the final shortcut you open from the bottom floor, I always forget where the gate is anytime I come in from the top of the dungeon, so I'm stuck panicking because all the hallways look the same. It's a skill issue from my part, but it is difficult. Once you get past the roller disco jailer derby downstairs, there's a single stone gargoyle blocking you from the profaned capital, which isn't a big issue, it's really just the jailers. They are so insufferable and make fighting anything else in the dungeon a complete chore. Who wants to actually clean this area out when you have to deal with enemies that can force Estus usage without even touching you? Of all the base game areas you have to visit on your playthrough, you've all voted this one the hardest, and I salute you for having a correct opinion. At number 4, we have the Ariandel Township, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.49 out of 10, with 91 votes for hardest area. It just barely missed out on our top 3, and I can't help but wonder if the painted world of Ariandel would have managed it had I not split it into 2 areas. Still, the township is a brutal part of the painted world, with some of the toughest enemies and challenges to deal with. The Corvian settlement features the Corvian Knights, some of the sickest enemy designs in the series, whether it's the Wolverine-clawed attacker in the Blood River, or the rapier-wielding fencer who keeps everyone from the mansion atop the hill. They're so iconic. The mountain pass behind the town, which you have to explore to reach the rotting nest, is so tightly designed. It's a maze of paths that lead over ridges and into valleys, with it never being clear which way is correct. You have landmarks like the giant bell to send to you, but then you're being ambushed by Farron followers, Millwood Knights are using their earthquake weapon skill on you from afar, and wolves are trying to bite your face off. It's amazingly difficult. But it also represents the toughest part of the DLC, as once you reach the rotten nest, it's just heading to the lower floor, flipping a switch, and getting out of there. Sister Fried also likely drives the difficulty of this area up a tad, as she's considered by my fans to be the hardest boss of Dark Souls 3. When's she coming to Night Rain, I wonder? It'd be remiss though if I didn't mention the descent into the icy valley needed to face the Grave Tender boss fight. While I can manage it easily nowadays, I remember the first time people tried this DLC. They were slipping off of roots, falling into the depths, and getting shot by archers. It was a thing of beauty. There's just so much to see and do in the Ariandel Township. It's the meat and bones of the DLC and contains the hardest enemy setups, so it's no surprise it managed to land this high on our list. At number 3, we have Archdragon Peak, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.53 out of 10, with 1 vote for easiest area and 106 votes for hardest area. As voted on by the fans, Archdragon Peak is considered the toughest area in the base game, and I agree on all fronts. Unlike an area like Irithyll Dungeon, Archdragon Peak isn't difficult because of bullshit mechanics. The enemies here, while a little annoying with their surprisingly long reach, are actually well designed and integrated into the area. You've got the introduction to everything pre-Ancient Wyvern, where you can get used to the man-serpents and their ilk, before taking on a fun little level gimmick as you have to kill a wyvern while avoiding its flames and climbing up the ruins to reach its weak spot. Oh, that's a boss fight? Well, that's dumb. It's all about presentation after all. Once you get to the second half of the peak, you have to cross the rightmost side of the temple, dealing with serpent men of all shapes and sizes, alongside the most evil of enemies in the entire game, the roly-poly rock lizards. These little fuckers are responsible for most of my deaths in Archdragon Peak, as they can poise break you and deal bone wheel skeleton style damage ticks. combined with the fact that a ton of them appear near an optional wyvern encounter, and you have a recipe for death. I do like the last part of the zone, where you're encouraged to fight your way through gauntlets of serpent men to reach the very peak of the temple, where you can do a gesture to collect a rare item, and even view the corpse of a dragon on the far mountain. And of course, the Nameless King calls this place home, one of the toughest fights in the base game, and the boss that, in my opinion, truly brought attention to the concept of delayed attack patterns. It's no wonder that his area lands this highly. Oh, and you have to fight against Havel, who can squish you flat. Havel brings the difficulty of any zone he's in up by 1 just by existing. He's such a good rock man like that. At number 2, we have the Dreg Heap, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.83 out of 10, with 3 votes for easiest area and 111 votes for hardest area. I always knew that the Ringed City DLC was going to win out on this poll long before anyone had even cast their first vote, because by God, its areas went above and beyond to provide us with the challenge deserving of the final Souls DLC. And the Dreg Heap started us off with a host of tough enemies to take on, precarious platforming as we slowly descended our way to the Demon Prince, some horrifying traps like those dark spirits that emerge from the ground and charge you, and we even get to rectify Dark Souls 2's Poison Swamp. Remember how a few videos ago I said that Earthen Peak's Poison Swamp was gaseous and how I thought it was quite unique? Well, Miyazaki took that personally and decided to destroy Earthen Peak while also slathering poison all over its remains. He even left us with Pyromancer Zoe to one-shot the player with her fire fan. It feels like a true Dark Souls 2 experience. But who am I kidding? The main reason for the Dreg Heap landing at number 2 isn't for the level design, the Poison Swamp, or the regular enemies. It's because of the 3 Pilgrim Angels that spawn throughout the zone, who act as turrets that fire at anyone who dares to breathe wrong. The only way to destroy them is to find their former form as a pilgrim and destroy the effigy left behind. And the first angel is fairly easy to defeat. You find it on the main path, you have a lot of buildings to shield your way. Can't say the same for the other 2 angels down at Earthen Peak Ruins, though. One of them requires you to do an insanely precise drop down onto a precarious route, where the slightest mistake will see you falling into the void. Close enough. Welcome back, Better Chaos. While the third has you needing to rush through the Poison Swamp while getting attacked by regular enemies and getting Gatling gunned by the Angel's light beams, so you can reach a far rooftop to destroy it. It's absolutely unhinged and was tough when the game first came out and is still tough to this day. However, with the Angels being so much tougher than the rest of the zone, it's no surprise that it couldn't rise into the 8s or the 9s. Unlike... At number 1, we have the Ringed City, which scored a total difficulty average of 9.25 out of 10, with 159 votes for hardest area. Without a doubt, the final area of the Soulsborne trilogy is considered to be the hardest of Dark Souls 3, and just 0.14 points behind Dark Souls 2's Frigid Outskirts. The Ringed City starts off with a massive fuck you by introducing the player to the Adjudicators, who are able to summon the spirits of fallen foes to attack the player. They do this in the funniest way possible though, by starting you off against a firing squad, where you need to figure out the safe route to make it through. This is insanely hilarious to me. They said, you are not ready for this DLC. Then you get into the Ringed City proper, and you've got enemies that can curse you when you get close, hidden behind alleys and doorways. Then you've got the Ring Knights with their gaping holes that are just asking to be critically struck. They hit hard, they have fire imbued to their attacks, and are often paired with other annoying enemies like these Hermit Clerics. These fuckers will curse the spot you're on with a holy circle, and you have to find and kill them before they spam you to death. Then the lower streets are filled with Legion Knights, which can be struck by a plunging attack for an instant kill, but good luck getting them in a place when 5 of them are coming your way. The swamp has another Adjudicator who can summon more bowmen to shoot you down. There's a Dragonslayer armor refight as a mini-boss. There's an Avoid the Dragonfire section with Dark Eater Midir, followed by an actual Dark Eater Midir mini-boss, followed by the Dark Eater Midir optional boss. Dark Eater Midir shows up a lot. And to cap off the area before the final bosses, you have a single ringed knight who dual-wields great swords while waiting with what only can be assumed is the biggest shit-eating grin on his face. He looks so damn cool, and he's going to eviscerate you so damn quickly. The Ringed City is the only area in Dark Souls 3 where no matter the playthrough, no matter how I intend to explore the zone, I always end up forced into rushing between bonfires because I find myself on the back foot in every combat scenario. I honestly can't think of another area in any Souls game really that gives me that exact same sensation, and I suspect it's the same for many of you, as alongside a grueling Half-Light fight and the final confrontation against Gale, the Ringed City manages to land as the hardest area in Dark Souls 3. And that's the list. Do you agree with my community? Let me know down below, and remember, if you want your voice to be heard on my 2026 Souls Likes poll, there is a link down below. The votes will close at the end of the year. Be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my future videos. 40,000 subscribers is the current goal. If we can reach that, that would be fantastic. I want to give a shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. It's $4.99. You get a shout out in the description at the end of videos as well. You have access to my Dark Souls 3 Soul Level 1 run and my Dark Souls 2 Soul Level 1 run, and the rest of my Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment playthrough whenever I get around to filming more episodes. If you want to follow me on social medias, I have a Blue Sky, a Twitch, and a Discord. Blue Sky is the best place to go to follow me on social media, it's where I'm most active, or you can tune into any of my weekly YouTube streams. Check my community posts to see my schedule. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Adios.